In this episode of Director Discussions, I am honored to sit down with the man, the myth, the legend, genuinely one of my favorite filmmakers and just one who I've wanted to chat with for so long, the amazing Derek Cianfrance. You may know him as the director behind films such as Blue Valentine, The Place Beyond the Pines, Light Between Oceans, and on top of that, the HBO miniseries, I Know This Much Is True. Derek, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, sir. How impressed are you with that introduction?
That was really good.
Thank you.
I love your work.
I
I
just
love
did
all
it.
your other interviews.
I just did it off the top of my head. I didn't have a page, anything like that. I just kind of excel at these things. I have a great memory. No,
Exactly.
thank you so much. I've wanted to chat with you for so long, and genuinely, the stuff you've been doing is just amazing. So thank you so much, sir. But no, let's jump right into it. What's the Derek Cianfrance origin story? You know, did you just come out of the womb watching films? Was there a specific film as a child you watched and you were like, that now I want to be a filmmaker? Was there a film like that?
Yeah, well, so I'm a product of the VHS generation. You know, I was born in 1974. One of my first memories was my brother's 8-year-old birthday party. I was like 5 or something, and could have been a little older. It was around that time. And for his birthday party, my parents rented a VCR, and they rented a couple movies. They rented Creepshow and Airplane 2. And we watched that with all of his buddies in our sunken living room of our suburban house in Lakewood, Colorado.
Was
And I
that
just
George
fell in love.
Romero's? Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt
George
you.
Romero. George Romero. And so I just was like amazed. I couldn't believe we were watching movies, you know, at home like that. And a couple months later, I had my birthday, and I did the same thing. I followed my brother's path. You know, we rented a VCR. I had my friends over for a slumber party. We rented Creepshow and Airplane 2, and we watched it. About 4 or 5 months later, we purchased our first VCR, and we got a subscription to HBO. And Creepshow and Airplane 2 were both playing on HBO that year, so we recorded them. And I spent the next year literally like watching Creepshow every day. That was like the film that really got me. And I studied it and just memorized it. And you know, I never knew anything other than wanting to be a filmmaker. You know, before I ever had a camera, I had a cassette tape deck, and I would go around my house and I would interview people, or I would get my family skates with, or I would, get performances out of people. I had to have my grandmother tell me an off-color joke. I would hide this tape recorder in my jacket and have my brother and I would get in a fight, and I would show him I had the tape.
That's a tried and true method. That's blackmail 101.
Yes. So kind of everything that I've been doing now, I really feel like the same exact person I was when I was a kid, doing exactly the same thing. You know, by the time I went to like middle school, I think I was 13, and I found, my librarian had a video camera that he used to send out to me. I always had a little trouble reading in school. I was never diagnosed with anything. I just kind of kept it as like my hidden, it became, I developed this other superpower of being able to kind of intuit stories, and movies, because I had trouble reading. These were my gateway into understanding what it was to be a person. And so I started making my own movies. By the time I was like 18, I had made like I don't know, a couple dozen short films starring my family. And yeah, it's just always what I wanted to do, and always what I've been doing.
I imagine a young Derek Cianfrance talking to his grandmother. You're not giving me enough emotion, all right? Just give me something more, you know? You're holding the camera up there, like, okay, for this scene, I want you to really show me who you are. So I mean, that's how you start off as a great director. But no, when you first, started out, with actual feature films. I mean, I know your first is Brother Tide, but that's kind of a different story altogether. When you've also done some documentaries, am I correct in saying so? Was that kind of how you started? Is that kind of how you got into the industry?
Well, I had all this ambition. I went to film school. I did pretty well in film school. My student, short films did, pretty well. They won some awards at the film school. And then I had this ambition. I wanted to make a movie. So I convinced my parents to allow me to drop out of film school.
Yeah.
I'm not recommending people drop out, but I did, and I raised $40,000 from asking people in, my dentist gave me like $2,500, and I pitched them on this idea I was going to make a movie, and they all invested in the movie. I sold t-shirts, and eventually just bit by bit got up to 40 grand, and I made this movie called Brother Tide, and it took about 4 years to finish it. And when I finished it, one of my ambitions with that film was to make a movie that had the most edits in movie history. I had been a big fan of Sam Peckinpah, and the Wild Bunch had like over 1,600 cuts in it. And so with Brother Tide, one of my ambitions, and one of the ways I sold it to people was like, I told them I was going to make the most edits in movie history. And I had like 1,600. Yes, I had 1,630 edits in the movie. And I remember it got into Sundance. And I remember being at a screening at Sundance, and there was like 6 people in the audience. And I realized that 6 people cared about how many edits I could make. And it humbled me. The film went out there, it went to a lot of places, but it didn't get sold. It didn't get seen by, a large number of people. And I, at that Sundance, that was 1998, I started writing Blue Valentine. That was 98. I didn't make Blue Valentine until 2009. So in those years, those were like the humbling years for me. That was the time when I couldn't, because I had this failure, because I had raised $40,000 and not made my investors their money back. No one was jumping at the opportunity to give me money again. So what I had to do was, I figured, not get mad at the world, not get mad at my, I felt like a player, who's like sitting on the bench and just wants to get in the game. And so what do you do if you're not in the game? You practice. You just keep practicing. You work on your craft. And so documentaries started. I started to get some opportunities making docs. And in making docs, that was like a further humbling experience, because what I realized is, because you have this image of the director, which is, I think Cecil B. DeMille probably created the image of like the director with a megaphone, right? And it's all about the director's voice. And what does that megaphone do? It people to do. And when I was making docs, I realized that megaphone would not be about me telling these real people what to do with their lives, but it would be a listening device with which I could funnel the world in. And so I in making, I kind of learned to listen. I learned that it wasn't about my voice or what I was going to tell people to do, but what I could observe and how I could bring out performances in people in a different way rather than telling them which way to go. I had to respond to, I could ask them a question in an interview and they would answer it in a way that maybe I didn't expect. And then I had to stay on my toes and really listen, like you do now. And so when I eventually got the chance to make another movie again, Blue Valentine, I was in this mode of like, I had been humbled and I had learned how to listen from making docs. And I had these 2 great actors, I had a bunch of great actors on that film, and I had this script I had written 66 drafts of, and I had 1,224 storyboards. And I was thinking, am I going to go into this again and like make the most cuts in movie history? Am I going to go in again? It's all about my ego as a filmmaker. Last time I did that, I kind of got squashed by it. And what I realized is that people go to movies because they love actors, or at least I did. When I had that trouble reading as a kid, it was actors that showed me what it was like to be a person. And so I decided to kind of blur this line a little bit between documentary and fiction in my work. And anyway, so that's how I got into docs. That's, and so as every movie I make now, it's still documentary is like a huge part of it.
I can definitely see that. It's really interesting you brought that up. But do you think if you never went through that documentary period, if after doing Brother Tide, jumped straight into another feature, would you be the filmmaker you are today? If you never explored that? No, really? Do you think you'd be
I don't think so.
A lesser filmmaker in a way?
I think I believe in failure,
Yeah.
right? I think failure is crucial. Hold on, my dog wants to get outside of my room here. Hold on one second.
No worries. Like we were saying at the start, Derek's dog is the
Yeah.
special guest of this. This is how I'm going to get all
Yes.
the views.
She'll come back in. Yeah, I think failure teaches you so much. You have to learn to adapt with failure. If you have success, then you're kind of left. Yeah, I think the lessons of success aren't. I think you can get into more trouble with success, because I think one of the great gifts of an artist is, like, an athlete has to be confident all the time. If you're going to go out on that field or on that court, you have to be confident. Artists, I don't always feel like need confidence. I think sometimes confidence as an artist can delude you. So
Yeah.
I think that failure and humility as an artist is good, because it makes you question yourself and question what you were doing. So I'm thankful. Like, look, if my first film, Brother Tide, would have been a success, I would have made Blue Valentine right away.
Yeah.
Not only me as a filmmaker, not only did I change as a filmmaker over those 11, 12 years, but I changed as a human being too, right? So I wrote that script I started writing it when I was 24 years old, as a child of divorce, right? My parents had divorced, but I wasn't in I had been in a long-term relationship with someone, but I wasn't yet married and I didn't have kids. So by the time I made Blue Valentine, which is a film about marriage, I was now married and I had kids. So not only did my lessons of filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, and help guide my path on that, but also my experience as a human being, allowed me to tell the story of marriage more from understanding what it was like to be married. And in a lot of ways, I made that movie as a cautionary tale to myself, as someone who wanted to maintain their marriage and maintain their individuality at the same time. So yeah, it's hard. Like I've thought sometimes about what I would have made. I think the films I would have made if Brother Tide would have been more of a success, critically and financially, I think I would have probably been more of a showy. I think it would have been more about my ego when I made movies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what I really admire about that is your will. I mean, Blue Valentine took what, 10 years to get made? Something like that?
Well, it's ultimately 12. By the time from when I started writing it till it was released, was 12 years.
Yeah, and so when you're doing something like that, is it hard for you to just say, well, I mean, is it even, how do I know that this project is good enough to be pursuing for this long? Was there ever kind of any element of, I'm just going to abandon it? Or did you always keep that willpower until you got the film made?
Yes, there's the one time I really got in a fight was I got in a snowball fight with a good friend of mine named John.
Yeah.
And John was bigger than me, and I wouldn't stop throwing snowballs at him. And he eventually smashed my face into the snow. And he said, "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" And it was a lesson he was trying to teach me, but I've never learned that lesson. On when to quit.
And I think you're all the better for it. I mean, that tenacity is what I just love about filmmakers, that ability to just say, I can imagine, you throwing snow, but that's a perfect way to look at it. But no,
even though sometimes when you're making film, like by the time I made Blue Valentine, I honestly didn't want to make it, but it was just pure stubborn. A pure stubborn quality that I had inside that forced me to do it, because I think it's just important as an artist to finish things, whether or not they're good or bad, whether or not they work out or they don't work out. It's just important to finish, because if you don't finish, you leave all these loose ends everywhere, and then you create a narrative of not finishing. So there has to be a way. whether you finish it or like, with Sound of Metal, that was a film that I was doing called Metalhead, which I knew I wasn't going to finish the way I was doing it. And so I gave it to my friend Darius to finish and finish it in a different way as the person who wrote the story and a executive producer and helping him do it. So I think the most important thing is just finishing, getting to the end of projects. And it's always, you take it as far as you can go. There was a lot of time in my life with Blue Valentine where I was that delusional guy who had this idea for a movie. All of my friends knew about it. All of my family knew about it. And it was like years and years and years and years, 12 years between, say after like 3-4 years, people are starting to think like, you're never going to make that.
Yeah.
And it's that doubt starts to creep in. And to me, it just becomes like, that becomes the fuel. Yeah, sure.
Amazing. I mean, yeah, and I think that's really amazing. But you've talked about this before in a few of your interviews, and I feel like obviously this all stems from that documentary filmmaking. But something that fascinates you as an actor is where or as in terms of acting, is when acting stops and behavior begins. And I think I don't even have to tell anyone, if you've watched a Derek Cianfrance film, there's such an amazing kind of realism that I feel is something that's missing in a lot of other films, and I feel like that's what makes you one of my favorite filmmakers. That it'd be easy to go in and tell a romanticized film about a bank robber and about kind of corrupt police and stuff like that. But the way you handle it, the way these people speak and stuff like that. So could you kind of expand on that point of why it's so fascinating to you, that idea of, when acting stops and behavior begins?
Yeah, well, first off, that came from a lot of my work as a documentarian. Like I said, I would ask people questions. They wouldn't necessarily answer it the way I thought they would. So already my expectations were never met. And I started realizing maybe this could be an ally to me, is to consider expectations, the things that I want, that I expected to happen. Maybe if I start thinking that that's my nemesis as a filmmaker, expectations. And what's the opposite of expectations? I like to think it's preparations.
Yeah.
Right. So I try to think of anything that I ever make as situations. Right. So, and when I write in a script, I'm making all the choices myself. I'm following my muse, and it's coming on the page, and it's and the page is, I can say I'm doing it myself, but actually I'm just catching something. I'm catching some muse, some inspiration, and putting it on the page.
Sure.
Every time I go back to a script, Blue Valentine 66 times, Place Beyond the Pines 30 something times, everything I write constantly evolves. And that's because every time I go back to the page, the muse takes me somewhere else. And so what I'm trying to do when I have actors involved, what I try to do is let them then have some ownership in these characters and these moments that they're in.
Sure.
And what I want to do is not find what I expected to find, on the page, but I want to find the surprises. I want to find the moment that someone answers a question the total opposite way that I expected them to. Yeah. I want to find that when someone walks into a room, the chair breaks. And so some of those things you can start to like prepare for and plan for, right? You can imagine that, Ryan Gosling and the bank robbery. I don't really know how that's going to, I know he's got to rob the bank. I know how he's going to do it, right? I don't really know what everyone in the bank is going to do to the reaction. And so for that scene, for instance, I since you brought it up, what I did is I cast a bunch of people as extras, as bank employees who all worked in banks, who had all been involved in a bank robbery.
Really?
Right? Yes.
Did you put out a list looking for people involved in bank robberies?
We had befriended some a bank, the bank managers and some people up in Schenectady who knew of the banks. And so if you work at a bank, there's people who work at banks who have been in robberies, and they know people who have been involved in them. And so we start connecting like that. It's not actors, it's just real people. And so my calculus on this is that Ryan Gosling is going to be able to go into the bank robbery and everyone's going to react as normally as they did in the real bank robbery. But hold on a second.
That's a great moment for your camera to just cut off. That's the suspense building. But
but what I didn't realize is that on take one, all those people that were not actors were kind of excited to see Ryan Gosling. Really? And so the first take was a bunch of people like checking out Ryan Gosling coming in the bank as a bank robber. And I remember it didn't work out. And Ryan and I started talking, and he's like, they're not reacting to me. And I was like, because you're not scary enough. You gotta scare them, you know? And so we go back in, do the bank robbery again. He like starts to yell at him, doesn't really affect him. So I just kept goading Ryan, like, you got to do more, until finally we get to this take where his voice is cracking and he's this desperate guy, and they're like, and he's not playing around anymore. And they're kind of done with these extras are done with the Ryan Gosling show. They're just like, well, this is getting kind of weird. The energy is kind of weird in there. Now, in a real bank robbery, probably what would happen is people would see that gun and it would be enough. But the way that we shot it and what happened to Ryan Gosling through this process was that he became this desperate character. Who's just disassociating with his own body and going into this distortion loop of just, you know, he's breaking down as a character. And so Ryan the actor and Ryan the character are kind of one at that moment, and that's where behavior happens. And to me, that's the chemistry of filmmaking that I really love. Is like, okay, how do we? This is it's an experiment, right? And how do we make this experiment? How do we discover something in this experiment that we've never seen before, that we couldn't plan for? And I think of really scientifically like that. And I had heard, actually, and I don't know if this is true, but I'd heard that Einstein, he used to, when he would think about hiring people for a job, I don't know if this is true, but I like this. He would take them out for breakfast, and he would watch and see if the person ate their food before they, and if someone would go in and get like 2 eggs over medium, and they would, like, first thing they do is just salt and pepper it, he would never hire that person, because to him it didn't represent a scientific mind. They were assuming what the food needed before tasting it first and then adapting. So what I try to do is keep that in my mind as a filmmaker. I go into the situation and I don't have the outcome. I mean, obviously I have a script that I've worked on. I've seen it in my mind. I've watched it in my mind, and, you know, 1,000 times before I ever get on set. But I still go in there with the scientific mind that is ready for any outcome. And anything can change any moment. And the actor, a choice of an actor, or a slip on the pavement, or a bunch of extras that aren't scared, can change the course of a lot of moves for me. And to me, that's when life and chaos, you know, like kind of interfere. I think filmmaking, to me, there's some filmmakers that are like, it's control and chaos, right? I think a documentary has a lot of chaos to it. You can't control what people are going to do. You can to an extent, but it's life. And like the best verite, Frederick Wiseman documentaries are embracing that. And it's a lot about, you know, it's like, it's not fly on the wall. I really don't like that term, but it's engagement. It's a filmmaker's engagement with the real world. And then you have other films that are like incredibly controlled. And I love those kind of films too. You know, I love like a David Fincher movie. It's amazing the amount of control that he has. But I think what I'm looking for in my movies is a place where that chaos and that control kind of intersect each other. And there's like a real push and pull between them.
Yeah, because you can write anything. You can write anything you
Mm,
want. But then when you're filming it, the weather's not how you imagined it being the script. Someone's
yes,
standing there. This actor isn't how you pictured they'd be. They're bringing something you never even accounted for. It's all that kind of
yes.
adapting to your surroundings, which I feel like not many aspiring directors realize you kind of need that. But yeah, and something I love about Place Beyond the Pines is there's a few things obviously, but the relationship at its core. I mean, Star Wars at its core is a family tale. I mean, you can kind of see that in something like this, but especially in a lot of your films, I mean, yeah, practically all of them, they're all tales about family, about relationships between people,
Mm.
about the people we consider close to us and that love. And like I said, it can be intertwined in bank robberies and corrupt police, but there's that heart to it. And can you so when you were doing something like Place Beyond the Pines, obviously, was your intention to go in and tell a tale essentially about two fathers and two sons, basically? Was that your intention to go in? Is that kind of,
Yeah,
is that for all
I
your
mean
projects?
the inspiration for Place Beyond the Pines was my wife was pregnant,
Yeah.
and I was the father of one son, and this was my second boy was about to be born, and I was thinking a lot about legacy. I was thinking a lot about past ancestral experiences and how my grandfathers, fathers were how generations
Yeah.
passed the baton. And there has been some trauma, in my family history, and I was just thinking about this pure child that was going to come into the world. And I was just really wanting my baby, my son, to be clear of it. I
Yeah.
wanted him to be his own person. Didn't want the sins of all the fathers
Yeah. Yeah.
to pass on to him. And so Place Beyond the Pines came from this meditation on being a father and carrying all of that legacy of generations, into that child. And I think that was the starting off point. And Place Beyond the Pines again is not a film to me that's about, it doesn't have a moral necessarily. It doesn't
Yeah.
have like an answer that it's trying to, it's a meditation. That movie is a meditation on fathers and sons and what gets passed on through the generations, and the desire for me to break cycles. And the desire of that movie is ultimately about this boy going off my boy going into the world as his own man,
Yeah.
as his own person. And yeah, that's like the mystery of that of that film.
Oh man.
Super personal,
Yeah.
super personal, and
I think you
and
can
made
feel
from
that
love.
that
Yeah.
personalness, and that it just helps make it great films. Like, I mean, even in stuff like sci-fi, like I've interviewed sci-fi directors like Neil Blomkamp, who I'm not sure if you know, he directed
Hmm.
District 9.
Of course.
And he was talking about,
Of
growing
course.
up in South Africa, you know, even though it's an alien film, it's about segregation and racism. I mean, he grew up
Yes.
looking at this on the street. So that's really fascinating when you can do such a personal story in kind of such a different world. And so something I'd love to ask you about, and this is something that's just so fascinating to me, that there's a shift in protagonist in the film. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't want to get into it too much, but and it's just such an amazing type of idea. I mean, is that just an idea you kind of toyed with specifically for that film? That kind of shift between this, we're introduced to a new character and then we follow him, which and like, none of them are like, neither of them are necessarily a bad person. I mean, they do bad things, but at the same time, you can see that they're both just people trying their best. And it's a really fascinating character study between two characters. Where did that idea for the shift in protagonist come from?
Yeah, making Blue Valentine and then Place Beyond the Pines, they were, they were so related to each other. Blue Valentine was a duet, right?
Yeah,
So there was a shift in perspectives in Blue Valentine. One is it was a shift between the man and the woman.
yeah,
It was a shift between the past and the present, between love and hate, between film and video, digital, because half that film was shot digitally. I built that whole movie out of duality. So the whole concept was like duality. And for The Place Beyond the Pines, I was thinking of a triptych of how
yeah,
to make a film that was about, uh, you know, uh, my very first idea for Pines was I was going to make a a 3-screen movie, that there was going to be 3 screens happening at the same time. It was, I obviously couldn't get my head around what the narrative was to that. And then my wife was pregnant, and I was just like, oh, it all happened to me all of a sudden. I was thinking kind of about a Western where this outlaw would get shot by a sheriff. And I was thinking, okay, well, what happens to that? What happens to that act of violence? How does that reverberate? And
how does it,
whereas Blue,
yeah,
yes, whereas Blue Valentine was like, it would go back to the past and the present. It was about long-term memory and short-term memory. This, all of a sudden, I wanted to try something that was unrelentingly linear, where you couldn't get out of the present, right? That you just couldn't get out of the moment. And so that moment became, okay, this guy is spiraling out of control. He's trying to be a father the best way he can, but it's bringing about his ultimate demise. And he collides with this cop. And I know, I talked to a lot of police officers that had been involved in shootings, and there was always the side of them that had been really affected by it, right? A brokenness to it, a brokenness to them. But to kill someone is intense. I mean, I wouldn't know, but I can't imagine.
Just clarification, Derek has no idea.
but I would just imagine meditating on it, like, oh, how do you then wake up and have breakfast with your own kid if you killed someone who was a father as well? And so I started thinking about that idea of violence and that reverberation of violence. And so many movies are filled with just violence is just it's just all over the place. And
it's desensitized, I feel, a lot.
Yes, it's desensitized, and it's become exploitative in a lot of ways. And look, I can have fun in the movies, but I get serious sometimes about things, and I just think about, like, if I put a gun in the movie, I just wanted it to have a real effect, as a gun would in real life, and not treat it as cool, or not treat it as like or not sensationalize it at all. Do the opposite of it. If a gun gets pulled in one of my movies, it would be consequential, and there'd be real reverberations as things like this happen. Like a moment like that in someone's family, someone gets shot, someone shoots someone, that will go on through generations. That will, your son's son will feel that reverberation of that gunshot. And so I just wanted to, do, and then, cinematically, I was looking at Psycho and thinking about, like, the greatest handoff in movie history, or one of the greatest, when Janet Leigh, 45 minutes into the movie, gets killed in the shower. And up until that point, you're watching a crime story about this woman who is on the run with this money. And then she winds up in, Tony Perkins' shower, and all of a sudden it becomes his movie. And so I was thinking, could I do that same sort of handoff, but make it thematic, as to this reverberation of violence through generations.
And
then the final handoff, and that was just made sense. That became thematic to me about fathers and sons. Then,
is it true that you talk about kind of putting an intermission in the film?
I did. Yeah. My initial idea was, between the second and third act, that there would be an intermission, because I love epic movies. I love nothing I like better than going to the movies. I remember seeing Ben-Hur in Colorado at a matinee screening, and just watching the most incredible movie that I'd ever seen. And then all of a sudden there was this, and then it said intermission, and I went outside, and it was dark out, and I still had another hour and 15 minutes of a movie to watch. And that's what I wanted. But that's part of delusion. There's a fine line as a filmmaker between delusion and belief,
dude.
And So it turned into 15 years later. But yes, the original version of that
That's
was
great.
Intermission.
Yeah, well, that's
Yes.
amazing. But I'm so sorry for taking up so much time. Just a few more
Yeah.
questions.
No.
And
Yeah.
you know, when you're exploring these films, like I mean, in Blue Valentine, I know you shot all. For anyone who doesn't know, there's good parts of that film, and then there's kind of bad parts with the characters. Not like bad parts, but like these characters who go through kind of these worser moments. When you're
Mhm.
doing those great moments, and then you're pushing these actors, say like, oh, you love this person before, now you have to hate them. I want you to despise them. Is there ever, and you know, you've done it obviously in a few of your works. Is there ever kind of an element of, well, it'd be easier if you didn't have them yelling. If you made Blue Valentine a romance film, it probably would have been easier to shoot, and it would have been, but it wouldn't have been as true as if you told that story, which is about real relationships and real people. Is it hard to have that unwaveringness as a filmmaker? Do you ever feel like, oh well, I can just compromise? I'm okay with having this come off as a little bit unrealistic if it kind of makes everything feel brighter, or are you okay to kind of go into these darker facets?
Yeah, you know, the darkness and the light is always an interesting balance. Um, you know, sometimes because I fight so hard to try to represent, uh, you know, I love movies, right?
Yeah,
I love escape. I love to escape to a land, to a world in the movies that isn't my real life. But I also think that that's not the only thing movies can do,
yeah,
right? I think movies can also reflect some some of the darkness. And
yeah,
sometimes I fight for the darkness so much that I think sometimes I can tip into darkness. Um, it's it's an imagination thing. My imagination is tuned towards tragedy,
yeah.
towards, yeah, but it probably comes from me as a kid loving horror movies,
Sure.
um, and really responding to movies like Creep Show or Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn or Night of the Living Dead or Rosemary's Baby. I mean, those were shining, just movies that I could not stop watching. Freaks. They always felt like, wow, uh, they just made me feel comforted. You
Yeah.
know, this how scary they were. And when I went to film school, that idea of horror movies were kind of shamed out of me by yeah, I love my professors, but they kind of shamed it out of me. And I just, and then I saw Cassavetes movies and I decided like, oh, maybe what I could do is just write movies about people with these demons inside them, with these
Yes.
things inside them, with these psychological things going on, or these, emotional things going on. And maybe I can make movies that are really about, Blue Valentine was written initially, it was supposed to take place on Halloween,
Yeah.
and because I thought it was a horror movie about love.
Yeah.
And I eventually changed it to, again, this is, the time that I was able to shoot it with actors availability was in the summer, and there's the 4th of July, right? And we had all these conversations about, can we make the trees brown? Can we make the
Sure.
leaves fall on the street? Can we set up Halloween? But it's so hot. And I was just like, maybe we just turn it into, a movie about America. Maybe
Yeah.
this is happening with fireworks at the end instead of like what Spielberg did it with E.T. And have it take place, in Halloween and so anyway, that was a real moment of like, the fireworks is a great example of of the light
Yeah.
in the darkness, the light in the darkness. And ultimately what I would like to find the balance in my movies is that balance between the light and the dark. And
Yeah.
sometimes I would say, if I'm going to be critical of my own work, is that it's so hard to fight the darkness.
Yeah.
Sometimes the darkness can win out in some of my movies.
All right. Yes. Sorry. I feel like you're not opposed to optimism as a filmmaker. You can still, I mean,
No,
place Beyond the Pines. I'd argue that that's kind of it. That's a rather bittersweet, optimistic ending. I mean, The Light Between Oceans. I'd wager that's more optimistic as opposed to a lot of your other films. So I feel like you're definitely not opposed to it as a filmmaker.
I Know This Much Is True to me has a very hopeful ending. It probably, in a lot of ways, I think I Know
Yeah.
This Much Is True has the most hopeful ending of anything I've ever done, because it's a glimmer. It's not a complete wash of
Yeah.
hope. It's not letting the audience off the hook, but it's providing a glimmer. I love movies that end and the characters who you've been watching, their life goes on. And I love, this idea of, I love the idea of like that, because I love it to experience it as myself, as a film goer, as an audience member, when the movie ends and I live with these characters and they keep living in my mind.
Yeah.
And so even Blue Valentine to me is a hopeful ending. I mean, Dean's kind of bummed out, but like for Cindy in that movie, she's freeing herself
Yeah.
from a situation that was not working out for her. And for Dean, in the future, I think that he'll be better off too, because he's not the best version of himself in that moment. So anyway, it's complicated. There's always multiple truths happening at any one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I mean, I know I'm so sorry to take up so much time. My last few questions.
No.
Another
Yeah.
thing I'd love to ask you. I mean, I know obviously this is all in the pre-phase. You can't talk about too much, but the Wolfman, is that something you're working on? Can you?
I'm working it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm working on it. It comes from this deep personal place inside of me, but it's also, this my final, first chance that I've had to really make that horror movie that's always lived
Yes.
inside of me. So I'm pretty psyched about it. We're gonna see what happens. There's still like timing and hoops to jump through and
Yeah.
availability and all this stuff, and so I'm pushing that. That's like another, I'm in it for the long haul. I have another couple horror movies too that I've been writing. I have one called Let It Break You. Hold on.
Yeah.
I have a film called Let It Break You that's I've been working on with a couple great young writers, Will Arbery and Drew Lewis, and yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Awesome.
going to be a horror movie in the future here.
The horror movie. I can't wait to see you embrace that, because I feel like a lot of your other films,
Yes,
you can kind of see those horror aspects. I'm really pumped for that,
yes,
and it's gonna be amazing. And I know, like Gosling talked about in an interview, how you've kind of dealt with the metaphorical term of a man turning into a monster, and
yes,
yeah, you can totally see it. But now when it's more literary, I cannot wait to see that. That's certainly
yes.
going to be amazing. But yeah,
Me too.
another thing I looked at you. We two projects we didn't get to touch a lot on, but these are two adaptations. Of course, I know this much is true in The Light Between Oceans. What's it like
Yes.
directing adaptations as a filmmaker? Is it kind of harder because you have to have so much respect for the novel and can't really, like, you can't just reboot it all?
You know, it's it's if the material, if you choose the material that speaks to you, that feels like it comes from inside of you, then you can, it didn't feel like that. It felt like, I mean, I had the blessing from both of those authors, ML Steadman and Wally Lamb, to basically turn both projects into my versions.
Yeah.
And I picked those two to work on because I also wanted to, just as documentaries kind of taught me a lot about performance and the moments, I wanted to have a couple experiences where I worked on something that was, the structure was already in place,
Yeah.
and I could understand the structure of storytelling from other people, from another master storyteller, be it Wally or ML, and and learn from it. Now, since those, I'm not working on any adaptations right now. It's all original
Yeah.
stuff, except for a show I'm doing for HBO called Muscle, which is based on Sam Fussel's book, and I've
Oh,
been working on that for a long time.
yeah.
And but that's also, developing into its own. Once you start working on these things, I Know This Much Is True, or Light Between Oceans, I'd say more with I Know This Much Is True, it eventually the story takes over. You can't when you're adapting a book, you can't just do a page by page
Yes.
translation of it. Literature and cinema are two very, very different
Totally.
mediums.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I just have so much, respect for how you've done something like that. And one of the
Oh,
last things
thanks.
I'd love to touch on, is it true you suffer from tinnitus?
Yes.
Yeah, my
Yes, I
dad,
do.
my dad is deaf and he suffers from tinnitus as well, which I mean
Oh, wow.
it's horrible. I mean, yeah, being deaf as well as having tinnitus, it's just, it's really unfortunate. But I know that kind of factors into work. So I just want to say it's really inspiring to see that, you have tinnitus and you're putting all these great films. So thank you so much for that, man.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
but let me touch you. What's your dream project as a filmmaker? If you could do any project, anything like this.
I mean, everyone I do is the dream. That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. Every film I've ever made is the dream.
Nice.
Every one of them is the dream, and sometimes the dreams take longer,
Yeah.
to get realized. Muscle I started working on that in 2007. So
The year
that's
I
a
was born.
15.
So you've been working on that as long as
Yes,
I was alive.
yes, yes. It's a 15-year project. So some dreams take a long time,
Yeah.
but everyone has to be a dream.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would make anything that wasn't affect your dreams. They become literal dreams as well as metaphoric dreams.
Yeah.
But that's also why I'm not in such a rush as a filmmaker to make a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm only going to make the things that I dream about.
Yeah.
And if I don't dream of it, if I'm just doing it for, like a paycheck or something, I would never do it.
Yeah.
There's other ways to make money.
And is Wolfman the only IP you can really see yourself working on?
That one came because I could understand, because they have let me write it
Yeah.
and make it my own. And because of that, I can see what it is. And I've spent the last year and a half in that, dreaming up what it would be.
Yeah. Have you
And so
scripted it?
if oh yeah, I'm in the process of writing it right now.
Oh, amazing.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's going to be amazing. Derek,
I hope so. Yes.
I cannot apologize enough for taking up so much time. My last question, I swear to you, what advice would you have for anyone looking to become a filmmaker?
Any advice for anyone to become a filmmaker?
Wait 12
you
years.
have to, well, you have to be relentless.
Yeah.
You have to embrace failure. You have to risk failure. You have to embrace failure. You have to make things that you want to see. That's, as a filmmaker, my North Star is always like, I'm an audience member first.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm writing a script or dreaming up, I'm thinking, oh, what do I want to see on the screen? Like, I'm an audience member, put my dream movie up on the screen. So just don't work from outside of yourself. Don't think about what other people want to see. Think about what you want to see, because you're probably a lot like other people, like the things that make us this, we have a lot in common, as people. And there'll be more people out there that want to see the same thing you want to see.
Totally. I mean,
I guess that's it. Are you making films?
That's the dream. Yeah, I'll just come and crash at your house when I'm rich and it's okay. You can take the couch. I don't mind. I'm not particular. I figure I'll just come over and just crash at your house because now we're best friends. So, but yeah, that's
yes. Are you writing things?
Yeah.
Great.
I'm going to sell you my own Wolfman. Except I play every character. My granny plays Wolfman. That's you started out with your granny, so I figure I'll just have her be my leading lady and all my productions.
Keep going. Well, I can't wait to see the movies you make, and yeah, anything you need, man, hit me up.
Derek, thank you so much, sir. I thank you enough for taking the time to chat me. You were so kind. I can't believe someone of your caliber would take the time to chat me. Before I let you go, are you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything like that?
I'm not.
No.
I stay completely away from social media. I just to protect I'm too sensitive.
You're a better man than I am. Any projects you can promote or talk about? Anything people can check out?
Oh, my wife has these great films that she's
Yeah.
been making called Chopped Liver. Uh, her name's Shannon Plumb, Plumb. Yeah, you can go to her YouTube channel. She's got a ton of stuff coming out. She just did an episode with Ava Mendez, which is really good. My wife's a comedian.
Yeah.
I'm I deal in tragedy. She deals in comedy.
There you go.
Perfect marriage.
There'll be a link for that in the description if I can find it. I mean, Derek, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to chat me. I'll touch you off for a little bit. Evan, before we finish up, you can go
Okay.
follow me over on Twitter if you'd like at Sambo1. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, if you mean, please make sure to donate to the National Deaf Children's Society. Link for that top of the description. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And Derek, thank you so much for chatting me, sir. Keep up the great work. And I just can't thank you again. Have a brilliant day. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching.
You too.
Bye.
Keep great work.
Oh, thank you. That means the world.